大家好，
大家好，
又到我哋讀你聽嘅時候啦。今日我哋繼續讀 Charles Dickens 嘅乜嘢
Great Expectations。
係啦，遠大前程啊，讀到第三部曲啦嚇，讀到佢第三個部分嚇，第40節啦。咁啊，故事發展嚟到呢度咧，呢個第二部嘅收尾係點樣收尾啊？
就係話嗰個監護人啊，供養人啊，
供養人
就係佢之前幫過嗰個逃犯啊。
係啦，即係其實佢就係繼承咗呢個逃犯嘅一個產業咯，又唔可以話遺產，因為佢未死啊，即係繼承者啦，係咪啊 ？OK， 咁就完全同佢原先估嘅
佢嘅 expectations 就好唔同啦。佢以為係 Miss havisham，
係啦，以為 Miss havisham 啊嘛，係嘛？以為同 estalla 有關嘅，點知原來係一啲關係都冇。
但係其實都幾好啊！有陣時喺度諗，即係佢同阿 estalla 都幾 friend 啊嘛，但係原來都唔關呢啲錢銀上嘅事。
但係喺呢一秒鐘，呢一個 pip 係好唔開心嘅。
係，梗係啦。
係因為佢跌埋心水，係覺得 Miss havisham 係真係為佢好嘅，係想佢好嘅。點知Miss havisham 只不過係利用你，只係利用你啫，有好多嘢都係利用你嘅啫。係啦 ，I don't care。反而係呢一個囚犯，佢一路都想撇清關係，直至到佢話俾佢聽你係我繼承人之前，佢都係想同佢撇清關係嘅。其實係佢都係咁講，佢話我幫過你，你感激我就夠㗎啦，你唔使嚟揾我㗎。其實佢咁嘅意思啊嘛，直接咁樣講啊嘛。咁但係呢個人就同佢講話，但係我知道你啲嘢好，500蚊都知喎，500磅都知喎，咁就毋庸置疑啦。即係 Mr. Jaggers 係佢嘅監護人，佢都知其實已經係一件事嚟㗎。係咯，已經知道。最知道幾多錢，其實已經話晒俾你聽㗎啦。咁亦都話埋俾你聽個動機係乜？個動機就係因為你幫過我，你令到我接受咗人性嘅光輝嘅一面。我都覺得你係個好嘅小孩子，你亦都長成咗一個咁樣嘅人。咁其實講到呢度，即係冇得唔信啦。冇得唔信啦，咁所以阿 pip 而家係接受咗呢個現實，但係佢亦都好唔想同一時間，因為佢同 Miss havisham 嘅距離就變咗爭咗好遠。同埋呢一個逃犯，佢始終佢唔係貴族出身啊嘛，佢都係低下階層，佢甚至乎係低下階層之中嘅最低下階層，佢係暴發戶啫。係，即係你始終阿 pip 同貴族始終都係掹唔上邊。始終都係掹唔上，你只不過係暴發戶，在最好嘅狀態，你都係一個暴發戶。
係咁咩？
係啊，
掹唔到邊嘅咩？除
非你咪自己去同嗰啲上流社會嘅人去接觸去交往。
咁佢都有去嗰啲，
即係用錢去建立你嘅關係咯。你明唔明啊？但係你話俾人聽你咩出身嘅時候，你始終都係唔話得俾人聽噶嘛？你冇可能話俾人聽，我繼承咗個逃犯嘅遺產咁樣，你永遠都入唔到上流嘅，係咪？咁當然你可以用錢去堆砌啦，咁但係喺呢一刻阿 pip 唔係諗呢啲嘢啊嘛，佢係諗緊佢同 estalla 嗰個關係嗰個身份越嚟越接近嗰陣時候，去到呢一刻佢覺得哇，原來所有嘢都係虛妄嘅，咁我究竟好唔好繼承佢啫？因為我繼承佢就意味住我要同呢個逃犯做哎呀父子喎，係幾難接受。因為佢心目中嘅佢仲係嗰個逃犯嘅狀態啊嘛，而唔係而家呢一個皮膚黑咗白色銀色頭髮嘅呢個狀態啊嘛，係咪啊？咁佢要點樣去對待呢一個呢一個咁樣係咯，呢個落差咧，點樣去對待呢個願意俾佢繼承遺產，願意俾佢繼承佢嘅產業嘅人咧，點樣面對佢咧？呢度繼續講啊，好唔好啊？好 ，Chapter 40。 It was fortunate for me that I had to take precautions to ensure the safety of my dreaded visitor. For this thought pressing on me when I awoke, held other thoughts in a confused concourse at a distance. The impossibility of keeping him concealed in the chambers was self-evident. It could not be done, and the attempt to do it would inevitably engender suspicion. 即係其實佢呢度頭嗰幾句已經話晒俾你聽，佢嘅思路嘅就係我唔可以呃唔到，即係我唔可以收埋佢，收埋佢都係冇用嘅，啲人都係會 find out 嘅。越係收埋啲嘢，啲人就越係起疑。所以佢點做咧？所以其實佢頭呢幾句已經話晒俾你聽，佢可能做嘅嘢，亦都話俾你聽佢唔可能做嘅啦。咁好啦，咁佢要面對啦，佢要正面對點樣做咧 ？True, I had no avenger in my service now, but I was looked after by an inflammatory old female, assisted by an animated ragbag whom she called her niece. And to keep a room secret from them would be to invite curiosity and exaggeration. 即係話俾你聽，點解唔可以收埋就因為呢兩個女人負責清潔負責打掃咁呢兩個女人會講嘢㗎嘛。They both had weak eyes, which I had long attributed to their chronically looking in at keyholes. 即係覺得佢哋好八卦啦。And they were always at hand when not wanted. Indeed, that was their only reliable quality besides larceny. 即係佢話，即係佢哋唯一最可靠嘅就係八卦。Always at hand when not wanted 。即係你要佢咧，佢就唔喺度嘅。你唔叫佢喺度喎，做咩啊 ？peep through 緊你嘅 keyhole 咯，所以佢 eyesight 就好差咯。呢個搞笑喎喺度啊！ Not to get up a mystery with these people, I resolved to announce in the morning that my uncle had unexpectedly come from the country. OK， 明啦，好啦，第一段短短一篇話晒俾你聽，佢就係咁樣去處理件事，亦都處理咗啦件事。好啦，咁之後點咧？ This course I decided on while I was yet groping about in the darkness of the means of getting a light, not stumbling on the means after all. I was fain to go out to the adjacent lodge and get the watchman there to come with his lantern. Now, in groping my way down the black staircase, I fell over something, and that something was a man crouching in a corner. As the man made no answer when I asked him what he did there, that but eluded my touch in silence, I ran to the lodge and urged the watchman to come quickly, telling him of the incident on the way back, the wind being as fierce as ever. We did not care to endanger the light of the lantern by rekindling the extinguished lamps on the staircase, but we examined the staircase from the bottom to the top and found no one there. It then occurred to me as possible that the man might have slipped into my rooms. So, lighting my candles at the watchman's and leaving him standing at the door, I examined them carefully, including the room in which my dreaded guest lay asleep. All was quiet, and assuredly no other man was in those chambers. It troubled me that there should have been a lurker on the stairs, on that night of all nights in the year, and I asked the watchman on the chance of eliciting some hopeful explanation as I handed him the dram at the door, whether he had admitted at his gate any gentleman who had perceptibly been dining out. Yes, he said, at different times of the night, 3. One lived in Fountain Court, and the other 2 lived in the lane, and he had seen them all go home. Again, the only other man who dwelt in a house of which my chamber formed a part, had been in the country for some weeks. And he certainly had not returned in the night, because we had seen his door with his seal on it as we came upstairs. The night being so bad, sir, said the watchman, as he gave me back my glass, uncommon few have come in at my gate. Besides them 3 gentlemen that I have named, I don't call to mind another since about 11 o'clock, when a stranger asked for you. My uncle, I muttered. Yes. You saw him, sir? Yes, oh yes. Likewise the person with him. Person with him? I repeated. I judged the person to be with him, returned the watchman. The person stopped when he stopped to make inquiry of me, and the person took this way when he took this way. What sort of person? The watchman had not particularly noticed. He should say a working person, to the best of his belief. He had a dust-colored kind of clothes on under a dark coat. The watchman made more light of the matter than I did, and naturally, not having my reason for attaching weight to it. When I had got rid of him, which I thought it well to do without prolonging explanations, my mind was much troubled by these two circumstances taken together, whereas they were easy of innocent solution apart, as for instance some diner out or diner at home, who had not gone near this watchman's gate, might have strayed to my staircase and dropped asleep there, and my nameless visitor might have brought someone with him to show him the way. Still joined, they had an ugly look to one as prone to distrust and fear as the changes of a few hours had made me. I lighted my fire, which burned with a raw pale flare at that time of the morning, and fell into a doze before it. I seemed to have been dozing a whole night when the clock struck 6, and there was full an hour and a half between me and daylight. I dozed again, now waking up uneasily, with prolix conversations about nothing in my ears, now making thunder of the wind chimney at length, falling off into a profound sleep from which daylight woke me with a start. All this time I had never been able to consider my own situation, nor could I do so yet. I had not the power to attend to it. I was greatly dejected and distressed, but in an incoherent, wholesale sort of way. As to forming any plan for the future, I could as soon have formed an elephant. When I opened the shutters and looked out at the wet, wild morning, all of a linen hue, when I walked from room to room, when I sat down again shivering before the fire, waiting for my laundress to appear, I thought how miserable I was, but hardly knew why, or how long I had been so, or on what day of the week I made the reflection, or even who I was that made it. 成日都覺得自己好 unfortunate 咁你都而家咁有錢啦，做咗個上流人，咁都要覺得自己好 miserable， 唔知係點嘅？即係雖然你係一個，即係你而家繼承咗嘅嗰個產業嗰個人係一個逃犯，佢以前，但係佢都係一個過去啦。同埋你而家又唔係破產，佢而家只不過話俾你聽，喂，我呢個俾你，佢唔係話俾你聽我要收翻喎。咁你依然都係擁有咁多嘢，咁點解要咁 miserable？ 即係我覺得阿 Pip 個人都真係好唔識諗咯。不過如果佢唔識諗，都唔會咁好高騖遠。即係佢淨係想有一個好嘅社會地位，但係佢從來都冇努力過嘅。At last, the old woman and the niece came in, the latter with a head not easily distinguishable from her dusty broom, and testified surprise at sight of me and the fire, to whom I imparted how my uncle had come in the night, was then asleep, and how the breakfast preparations were to be modified accordingly. Then I washed and dressed while they knocked the furniture about and made it dust. And so, in a sort of dream or sleep-waking, I found myself sitting by the fire again, waiting for him to come to breakfast. By and by, his door opened and he came out. I could not bring myself to bear the sight of him, and I thought he had a worse look by daylight. I do not even know, said I, speaking low as he took his seat at the table, by what name to call you. I have given out that you are my uncle. That's it, dear boy, call me uncle. You assume some name, I suppose, on board ship? Yes, dear boy, I took the name of Provis. Do you mean to keep that name? Why, yes, dear boy, it's as good as another, unless you'd like another. What is your real name? I asked him in a whisper. Magwitch, he answered in the same tone. Christen of Abel. Abel, 即係佢叫 Abel Magwitch 啦，原來。What were you brought up to be? A woman, dear boy. 唔知咩？佢係嗰啲發音嚟嘅。He answered quite seriously and used the words as if it denoted some profession. When you came into the temple last night, said I, pausing to wonder whether that could really have been last night, which seemed so long ago. Yes, dear boy. When you came in at the gate and asked the watchman the way here, had you anyone with you? With me? No, dear boy. But there was someone there. I didn't take particular notice, he said dubiously, not knowing the ways of the place, but I think there was a person too coming along with me. Are you known in London? I hope not, said he, giving his neck a jerk of his forefinger that made me turn hot and sick. Were you known in London once? Not over here and above, dear boy. I was in the provinces mostly. Were you tried in London? Which time? Said he with a sharp look. The last time. He nodded. First knowed Mr. Jaggers that way, Jaggers for me. He was on my lips to ask him what he was tried for, but he took up a knife, gave it a flourish, and with the words, "And what I'd done is worked out and paid for," fell to at his breakfast. He ate in a ravenous way that was very disagreeable, and all his actions were uncouth, noisy, and greedy. Some of his teeth had failed him since I saw him eat on the marshes, and as he turned his food in his mouth, and turned his head sideways to bring his strongest fangs to bear upon it, he looked terribly like a hungry old dog. If I had begun with any appetite, he would have taken it away, and I should have sat much as I did, repelled from him by an insurmountable aversion, and gloomily looking at the cloth. "I am a heavy grubber, dear boy," he said, as a polite kind of apology when he made an end of his meal, "but I always was. If it had been in my constitution to be a lighter grubber, I might have got into lighter trouble. Similarly, I must have my smoke. When I was first hired out as shepherd the other side of the world, it's my belief I should have turned into a melancholy mad sheep myself if I hadn't had my smoke." As he said so, he got up from table and putting his hand into the breast of the peacoat he wore, brought out a short black pipe and a handful of loose tobacco of the kind that is called Negro head. Having filled his pipe, he put the surplus tobacco back again, as if his pocket were a drawer. Then he took a live coal from the fire with the tongs and lighted his pipe at it, and then turned round on the hearth rug with his back to the fire, and went through his favorite action of holding out both his hands for mine. "And this," said he, dangling my hands up and down in his, as he puffed at his pipe, "and this is the gentleman what I made, the real genuine one. It does me good fur to look at you, Pip. All I stipulate is to stand by and look at you, dear boy." I realized my hands as soon as I could, and found that I was beginning slowly to settle down to the contemplation of my condition. What I was chained to, and how heavily, became intelligible to me as I heard his hoarse voice, and sat looking up at his furrowed bald head with its iron grey hair at his sides. I mustn't see my gentleman at footing it in the mire of the streets. There mustn't be no mud on his boots. My gentleman must have horses, Pip, horses to ride, and horses to drive, and horses for a servant to ride and drive as well. Shall colonists have their horses, and not my London gentleman? No, no. We'll show him another pair of shoes than that, Pip, won't us? He took out of his pocket a great thick pocketbook, bursting with papers, and tossed it on the table. "There's something worth spending in that there book, dear boy, is yourn. All I've got in mind is yourn. Don't you be afeard on it. There's more where it came from. I've come to the old country for to see my gentleman spend his money like a gentleman. That'll be my pleasure. My pleasure will be for to see him do it, and blast you all." He wound up, looking round the room and snapping his fingers once with a loud snap. "Blast you, everyone! From a judge in his way to the colonists stirring up the dust. I'll show a better gentleman than the whole kit on you put together." "Stop!" said I, almost in frenzy of fear and dislike. "I want to speak to you. I want to know what is to be done. I want to know how you are to be kept out of danger, how long you are going to stay, what projects you have." "Look at here, Pip," said he, laying his hand on my arm in a suddenly altered and subdued manner. "First of all, look at here. I forgot myself half a minute ago. What I said was no. That's what it was. No. Look at here, Pip. Look over it. I ain't going to be no. First, I resumed, half groaning, what precautions can be taken against your being recognized and seized?" "No, dear boy," he said in the same tone as before. "That don't go first. Lowness goes first. I ain't took so many years to be a gentleman, not without knowing what's due to him. Look at here, Pip. I was low. That's what I was. Low. Look over it, dear boy." Some sense of grimly ludicrous moved me to a fretful laugh as I replied, "I have looked over it. In heaven's name, don't harp upon it. Yes, but looky here, he persisted. Dear boy, I ain't come so far, not far to be long. Now, go on, dear boy, you were saying. How are you to be guarded from the danger you have incurred? Well, dear boy, the danger ain't so great. Without I was involved again, the danger ain't so much to signify. There's Jaggers, and there's Wemmick, and there's you. Who else is there to inform? Is there no chance person who might identify you in the street? Said I. Well, he returned, there ain't many. Nor yet I don't intend to advertise myself in the newspapers by the name of A.M. coming back from Botany Bay. And years have rolled away, and who's to gain by it? Still, look here, Pip. If the danger had been 50 times as great, I should have come to see you, mind you, just the same. And how long do you remain? How long? Said he, taking his black pipe from his mouth and dropping his jaw as he stared at me. I'm not going to go back. I've come for good. Where are you to live? Said I. What is to be done with you? Where will you be safe? Dear boy, he returned. There's disguising wigs can be bought for money, and there's hair powder and spectacles and black clothes, shorts and whatnot. Others have done it safe before, and what others has done before, others can do again. As to the where and how of living, dear boy, give me your own opinions on it. You take it smoothly now, said I, but you were very serious last night when you swore it was death. And so I swear it is death, said he, putting his pipe back in his mouth. And death by the road, in the open street not far from this, and it's serious that you should fully understand to be so. What then, when that's once done? Here I am. To go back now would be as bad as to stand aground. Worse. Besides, Pip, I'm here, because I've meant it by you years and years. As to what I dare, I'm an old bird now, as has dared all manner of traps since first he was fleshed, and I'm not afeard to perch upon a scarecrow. If there's death hid inside of it, there is, and let him come out. I'll face him, and then I'll believe in him and not a fool. And now let me have a look at my gentleman again. Once more he took me by both hands and surveyed me with an air of admiration, proprietorship, smoking with great complacency all the while. It appeared to me that I could do no better than secure him some quiet lodging hard by, of which he might take possession when Herbert returned, whom I expected in 2 or 3 days. That the secret must be confided to Herbert as a matter of unavoidable necessity, even if I could have put immense relief I should derive from sharing it with him out of the question, was plain to me. But it was by no means so plain to Mr. Provis, who reserved his consent to Herbert's participation until he should have seen him and formed a favorable judgment of his physiognomy. And even then, dear boy, said he, pulling a greasy little collapsed black testament out of his pocket, we'll have him on his oath. To state that my terrible patron carried this little black book about the world solely to swear people on in cases of emergency would be to state what I never quite established. But this I can say, that I never knew him put it to any other use. The book itself had the appearance of having been stolen from some court of justice, and perhaps his knowledge of its antecedents and antecedents, combined with his own experience in that wise, gave him a reliance on his powers as a sort of legal spell or charm. On this first occasion of his producing it, I recalled how he had made me swear fidelity in the churchyard long ago, and how he had described himself last night as always swearing to his resolutions in his solitude. As he was at present dressed in a seafaring slop suit, in which he looked as if he had some parrots and cigars to dispose of, I next discussed with him what dress he should wear. He cherished an extraordinary belief in the virtues of shorts as a disguise, and had in his own mind sketched a dress for himself that would have made him something between a dean and a dentist. It was with considerable difficulty that I won him over to the assumption of a dress more like a prosperous farmer's, and we arranged that he should cut his hair close and wear a little powder. Lastly, as he had not yet been seen by the laundress or her niece, he was to keep himself out of their view until his change of dress was made. It would seem a simple matter to decide on these precautions, but in my dazed, not to say distracted state, it took so long that I did not get out to further them until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He was to remain shut up in the chambers while I was gone, and was on no account to open the door. There being, to my knowledge, a respectable lodging house in Essex Street, the back of which looked into the temple, and was almost within hail of my windows, I first of all repaired to that house, and was so fortunate as to secure the second floor for my uncle, Mr. Provis. I then went from shop to shop, making such purchases as were necessary to the change in his appearance. This business transacted, I turned my face, on my own account, to Little Britain. Mr. Jaggers was at his desk, but seeing me enter, got up immediately and stood before his fire. "Now, Pip," said he, "be careful." "I will, sir," I returned, for, coming along, I had thought well of what I was going to say. "Don't commit yourself," said Mr. Jaggers, "and don't commit anyone. You understand, anyway. Don't tell me anything. I don't want to know anything. I'm not curious." Of course, I saw that he knew the man must come. "I merely want, Mr. Jaggers," said I, "to assure myself that what I have been told is true. I have no hope of its being untrue, but at least I may verify it." Mr. Jaggers nodded. "But did you say told or informed?" he asked me, with his head on one side, and not looking at me, but looking in a listening way at the floor. Told would seem to imply verbal communication. You can't have verbal communication with a man in New South Wales, you know. "I will say informed, Mr. Jaggers." "Good. I have been informed by a person named Abel Magwitch that he is the benefactor so long unknown to me." "That is the man," said Mr. Jaggers, "in New South Wales." "And only he?" said I. "And only he," said Mr. Jaggers. "I'm not so unreasonable, sir, as to think you at all responsible for my mistakes and wrong conclusions, but I always supposed it was Miss Havisham." "As you say, Pip," returned Mr. Jaggers, turning his eyes upon me coolly, and taking a bite at his forefinger. "I am not at all responsible for that." "And yet it looked so like it, sir," I pleaded with a downcast heart. "Not a particle of evidence, Pip," said Mr. Jaggers, shaking his head and gathering up his skirts. "Take nothing on its looks. Take everything on evidence. There's no better rule." "I have no more to say," said I with a sigh, after standing silent for a little while. "I have verified my information, and there's an end." "And magwitch in New South Wales, having at last disclosed himself," said Mr. Jaggers, "you will comprehend, Pip, how rigidly throughout my communication with you I have always adhered to the strict line of fact. There has never been the least departure from the strict line of fact. You are quite aware of that." "Quite, sir." I communicated to Magwitch in New South Wales when he first wrote to me from New South Wales the caution that he must not expect me ever to deviate from the strict line of fact. I also communicate to him another caution. He appeared to me to have obscurely hinted in his letter that some distant idea he had of seeing you in England here. I cautioned him that I must hear no more of that he was not at all likely to obtain a pardon, that he was expatriated for the term of his natural life, and that his presenting himself in this country would be an act of felony, rendering him liable to the extreme penalty of the law. I gave Magwitch that caution, said Mr. Jaggers, looking hard at me. I wrote it to New South Wales. He guided himself by it, no doubt. No doubt, said I. I have been informed by Wemmick, pursued Mr. Jaggers, still looking hard at me, that he has received a letter under date Portsmouth from a colonist of the name of Purvis, or Provis, I suggested. Or Provis, thank you, Pip. Perhaps it is Provis? Perhaps you know it's Provis? Yes, said I. You know it's Provis. A letter, under date Portsmouth, from a colonist of the name of Provis, asking for the particulars of your address, on behalf of Magwitch. Wemmick sent him the particulars, I understand, by return of post. Probably it is through Provis that you have received the explanation of Magwitch in New South Wales. It came through Provis, I replied. Good day, Pip, said Mr. Jaggers, offering his hand. Glad to have seen you. In writing by post to Magwitch in New South Wales, or in communicating with him through Provis, have the goodness to mention that the particulars and vouchers of our long account shall be sent to you, together with the balance. for there is still a balance remaining. Good day, Pip. We shook hands, and he looked hard at me as long as he could see me. I turned at the door, and he was still looking hard at me, while the two vial casts on the shelf seemed to be trying to get their eyelids open and to force out of their swollen throats. Oh, what a man he is. Wemmick was out, and though he had been at his desk, he could have done nothing for me. I went straight back to the temple, where I found the terrible provost drinking rum and water and smoking Negro head in safety. Next day, the clothes I had ordered all came home, and he put them on. Whatever he put on became him less than what he had worn before. To my thinking, there was something in him that made it hopeless to attempt to disguise him. The more I dressed him, the better I dressed him. The more he looked like the slouching fugitive on the marshes. This effect on my anxious fancy was partly referable, no doubt, to his old face and manner growing more familiar to me. But I believe, too, that he dragged one of his legs as if there was still a weight of iron on it, and that from head to foot there was convict in the very grain of the man. The influences of his solitary hut life was upon him besides, and gave him a savage air that no dress could tame. Added to these were the influences of his subsequent branded life among men, and crowning all, his consciousness that he was dodging and hiding now, in all his ways of sitting and standing and eating and drinking, of brooding about in a high-shouldered, reluctant style, of taking out his great horn-handled jackknife and wiping it on his legs and cutting his food, of lifting light glasses and cups to his lips as if they were clumsy pannikins, of chopping a wedge off his bread and soaking up with it the last fragments of gravy round and round in his plate, as if to make the most of an allowance, and then drying his finger ends on it, and then swallowing it. In these ways, and 1,000 other small nameless incidents arising every minute in the day, there was prisoner, felon, bondsman, plain as plain could be. It had been his own idea to wear that touch of powder, and I had conceded the powder after overcoming the shores. But I can compare the effect of it, when on, to nothing but the probable effect of rouge upon the dead. So awful was the manner in which everything in him that it was most desirable to repress started through that thin layer of pretense, and seemed to come blazing out at the crown of his head. It was abandoned as soon as tried, and he wore his grizzled hair cut short. Words could not tell what a sense I had, at the same time, of the dreadful misery that he was to me. When he fell asleep of an evening, with his knotted hands clenching the sides of the easy chair, and his bald head tattooed with deep wrinkles falling forward on his breast, I would sit and look at him, wondering what he had done, and loading him with all the crimes in the calendar, until the impulse was powerful on me to start up and fly from him. Every hour so increased my abhorrence of him, that I even think I might have yielded to this impulse in the first agonies of being so haunted, notwithstanding all he had done for me and the risk he ran, but for the knowledge that Herbert must soon come back. Once I actually did start out of bed in the night, and begin to dress myself in my worst clothes, hurriedly intending to leave him there with everything else I possessed, and enlist for India as a private soldier. I doubt if a ghost could have been more terrible to me, up in those lonely rooms in the long evenings and long nights, with the wind and the rain always rushing by. The ghost could not have been taken and hanged on my account, and the consideration that he could be, and the dread that he would be, were no small addition. There was no small addition to my horrors. When he was not asleep, or playing a complicated kind of patience with a rag pack of cards of his own, a game that I never saw before or since, and in which he recorded his winnings by sticking his jackknife into the table. When he was not engaged in either of these pursuits, he would ask me to read to him. "Foreign language, dear boy." While I complied, he, not comprehending a single word, would stand before the fire surveying me with the air of an exhibitor, and I would see him, between the fingers of the hand with which I shaded my face, appealing in dumb show to the furniture to take notice of my proficiency. The imaginary student pursued by the misshapen creature he had impiously made was not more wretched than I, pursued by the creature who had made me, and recoiling from him with a stronger repulsion. The more he admired me, the fonder he was of me. This is written of I am sensible as if it had lasted a year. It lasted about 5 days. Expecting Herbert all the time, I dared not go out, except when I took Provis for an airing after dark. At length, one evening when dinner was over and I have dropped into a slumber quite worn out, for my nights had been agitated and my rest broken by fearful dreams, I was roused by the welcome footstep on the staircase. Provis, who had been asleep too, staggered up at the noise I made, and in an instant I saw his jackknife shining in his hand. "Quiet, it's Herbert," I said, and Herbert came bursting in with the airy freshness of 600 miles of France upon him. "Handel, my dear fellow, how are you? And again, how are you? And again, how are you? I seem to have been gone a 12-month. Why, so I must have been, for you have grown quite thin and pale. Handel, my hello, I beg your pardon." 佢話 my hello 即係見到啦。He was stopped in his running on and in his shaking hands with me by seeing Provis. Provis, regarding him with a fixed attention, was slowly putting up his jackknife and dropping in another pocket for something. "Herbert, my dear friend," said I, shutting the double doors, while Herbert stood staring and wondering. "Something very strange happened. This is a visitor of mine." "It's all right, dear boy," said Provis, coming forward with his little clap-back book, and then, addressing himself to Herbert, "Take it in your right hand. Lord strike you dead on the spot, if ever you slip in any way somehow. Kiss it." "Do so as he wishes it," I said to Herbert. So Herbert, looking at me with a friendly uneasiness and amazement, complied. And Provis, immediately shaking hands with him, said, Now you're on your oath, you know, and never believe me on mine, if Pip shan't make a gentleman on you." 咁啊，踢埋 Herbert 入會啦，一嚟就要 Herbert 發毒誓啦 ，Herbert 都唔知做乜。咁其實成篇嘢主要就係講咩？主要就係講阿 Pip 好唔中意 Provis， 好嘔心，覺得好嘔心，好唔想同佢相處，所有嘢佢都係核突嘅。點樣化妝，點樣易容，點樣打扮，只會令到佢覺得佢更加係一個囚犯。但其實佢已經唔係。而呢一個 Provis 亦都冇諗住要離開，而 Jaggers 亦都完全冇諗住要做啲乜，因為只要呢一個 benefactor 冇出現喺佢面前咧，佢依然都係佢嗰個法定嘅監護人。佢作為法定監護人咧，佢就有權去控制嗰啲錢啊，控制嗰啲嘢，所以佢就不停同其實佢俾阿 Pip 嘅 signal 就係。而家呢個 magwitch 咧，佢就唔喺英國嘅，佢只不過係傳話啫。佢揾咗個叫 Provis 嘅人哋傳俾你聽啫。佢同其實同一個人哋，但係佢就要話俾你聽，佢話咧嗱，我嘅認知係咁啊 ，OK 啦，咁你出去啦。但係其實佢就係知嘅，OK， 咁所以即係阿 Pip 都冇佢咁好氣啦。咁阿 Pip 而家點做咧？就係只係能夠同佢相處咯。咁個轉變，終於個轉變就係嚟到邊度咧？即係佢都冇符，終於個轉變就係點樣咧？就係 Herbert 翻嚟。咁而家 Herbert 都會知道，咁又會 Herbert 都知道埋，又會點發展咧？就係咁樣。即係我覺得第三部其實就係終於都和盤托出啦，知道咗哦，你就係邊個嘅繼承者啦？咁好啦，咁你點樣對待佢咧？你點樣處理件事咧？即係第三步似乎就係圍繞住呢樣嘢。咁 estalla 我諗就短期內都唔會出現。主要都係要圍繞翻阿 Herbert 啦。然之後你又要擔心阿 Herbert 會唔會同佢屋企人講啦，同 Mr. Pocket 講啊，咩啊？咁如果同埋 Herbert 知道咗，會唔會喺 Fringe Club 度同嗰啲死 gentleman 講啊咁樣咯，好嘛？咁啊繼續睇落去啦，睇下會有咩發展啦。OK， 好，下次再講，拜拜。